May 30th, 1941. The Sacred Rock of Athens. Just past 2 in the morning, 2 boys press themselves flat against the limestone at the base of the eastern bastion. One wears a thin grey jacket, the other carries nothing but a small lantern wrapped in cloth. 40 meters above their heads, on the highest point of the Acropolis, a banner 4 meters tall hangs in the windless dark. Black swastika on a blood-red field. The Reich's Kriegsflag. It has flown there for 33 days. Adolf Hitler ordered it raised the morning Athens fell. The Wehrmacht Garrison treats it as the symbol of conquered Europe, the proof that the Greeks have been broken, the announcement that the war in the Balkans is over and the new order has reached the cradle of Western civilization. Tonight, 2 unarmed students are going to climb up there and take it down. What they will pull off in the next 2 hours becomes the first organized act of resistance against Nazi occupation anywhere in Europe. Before the French Marquis, before the Polish Home Army goes operational, before any Allied Special Operations executive agent parachutes into the Balkans, 2 teenagers from Athens will humiliate the Wehrmacht on its own most prestigious flagpole. And almost nobody outside Greece has heard of them. How does an unarmed 18-year-old reach the top of the most heavily guarded monument in occupied Europe? And why, after taking the flag, does he refuse to bring it home as proof? His name is Manolis Glezos. He is 18 years old, second-year economics student at the University of Athens. Son of a village schoolteacher from the island of Naxos in the Cyclades. He learned to climb before he learned to read. Not on ropes, not on training walls, on the goat paths above the village of Aperanthos, the kind of paths where a misplaced foot on wet limestone means a 40-meter fall onto rock. By the time he was 12, he could climb a sea cliff with his hands in his pockets, and the village men would send him after kids who had wandered too high. That is the skill he will use tonight. Nobody who watches him walk through the university corridors would guess it. He is thin. He is quiet. He wears glasses for reading. He has the kind of face that sentries do not look at twice. The boy beside him is named Apostolos Santos, law student. From Patmos originally, the same kind of rocky island childhood. Sources later disagree on his exact age that night. Some say 19, some say 20, but on the rock it does not matter. He climbs almost as well as Manolis, and he is the one who first said the words out loud 2 weeks ago in a cafeteria on Solono Street. He said them as a joke. He said, "Somebody should pull that thing down." Manolis did not laugh. Manolis said, "I know how." In his jacket pocket, next to a folded city map and a stub of pencil, Manolis carries one other thing. A photograph the size of a playing card. His father at the schoolhouse in Aperanthos, standing in front of a Greek flag from before the war. His father is dead. He died in 1939 of pneumonia, 2 years before the Germans came. The photograph has been in this same pocket since the funeral. Manolis does not look at it tonight. He just touches it through the fabric. His father used to tell him, a flag is only a piece of cloth. What matters is what people are willing to do under it. Manolis is about to find out exactly what he is willing to do. The 2 of them have been at the base of the rock for 40 minutes. They came up through the placa after the curfew patrol passed, walked the back lanes with the slow shuffle of drunks heading home, and slipped through a gap in the wire near the old theatre of Dionysus. The wire was strung up 6 weeks ago when the Germans closed the archaeological site to civilians. It has not been moved since. Manolis knew it would not be. He walked this perimeter 11 times during daylight in the first 3 weeks of May, carrying a sketchbook, looking exactly like a student of architecture earning his marks. The Germans on the upper terrace got used to seeing him. They got used to seeing many young Athenians around the foot of the rock. After all, why would anybody want to climb the Acropolis? The way up is the marble staircase, and the marble staircase is guarded by an MG-34 at the top of the propylaea, by 2 pairs of rotating sentries on the south bastion, and by a non-commissioned officer with binoculars in the small wooden hut near the Erechtheion. The official German report, written later that summer, will state that scaling the cliff itself is physically impossible. The official German report is wrong. 40 meters above their heads, between the museum wing and the eastern edge, there is a vertical fissure in the limestone that runs almost the full height of the rock. Inside that fissure, 20 meters up, is the mouth of an ancient cistern. Sources will later disagree on which cistern exactly. The clepsydra system is named in most Greek accounts, the Mycenaean staircase in others, and the German engineers will spend 3 weeks after the incident arguing over the same question without reaching a conclusion. What is certain is that the fissure exists, that a boy who grew up on Naxos can climb it without rope, and that once you are inside the cistern, you can come up onto the plateau 20 meters from the flagpole through a hole the Wehrmacht does not know is there. Manolis discovered the fissure on his 7th sketchbook visit. He found the cistern mouth on his 9th. On his 11th, he went into the cistern at noon with a candle, climbed up to the inner shaft, listened to the boots of the sentries above him, counted the seconds between footsteps, and came back down. He has known for 3 days that this is going to work. He has not slept more than 2 hours a night since. Above them, on the bastion, a sentry's cigarette glows orange for a moment and is gone. Manolis taps Apostolos on the shoulder. The sentry has just lit up. He will smoke for 4 minutes. The next pair will not pass for 9. They have 9 minutes to get into the fissure before anyone looks down. Apostolos goes first, because if one of them falls, it should be the one without the root in his head. He puts his hand on the first hold, the small horizontal crack 3 feet off the ground, and starts up. But right now, at the base of the sacred rock, neither of them knows what is waiting at the top. They know one thing. The hardest part is not the climb. The hardest part is what they have to decide once the flag is in their hands. To understand how an 18-year-old ends up clinging to a fissure on the eastern bastion of the Acropolis at 2 in the morning, you have to go back 6 weeks. To the morning the Germans came down the Athens-Lamia road. April 27th, 1941. A Sunday. The Greek army has been fighting since October, first the Italians in Albania, then the Wehrmacht through Macedonia and Thessaly, and by the last week of April, the front is gone. King George II has flown to Crete. The government has resigned. At sunrise on the 27th, the first German motorcycles roll into the northern suburbs of Athens with no shots fired. The mayor of Athens, Ambrosios Plitus, meets a Wehrmacht colonel at the city limits and surrenders the capital formally at 8 in the morning. By 10, a German engineering detachment has climbed the marble staircase of the Acropolis. By 11, the Reichskriegsflagge is up. A photograph from that hour survives, black and white. The flag is enormous, much larger than the small Greek flag that flew there the day before. A German officer stands beside the pole in jodhpurs and a peaked cap, one hand on his hip, the other lifted in greeting. Behind him, the columns of the Parthenon. Below him, the city of Athens lies under a thin layer of dust, kicked up by tank columns. Manolis Glezos sees the photograph in the newspaper Eleftheron Vima 3 days later, or what is left of Eleftheron Vima. The Germans have already put a censor on the editorial floor. Manolis tears the page out, folds it, puts it in his desk drawer in the small rented room he shares with 2 cousins near the university. He does not say anything to his cousins. He is 19 days short of his 19th birthday. He has lived in Athens for 2 years. Before that, all his life on Naxos, the middle island of the Cyclades, in a stone village 300 meters above the sea called Aperanthos. His father, the schoolmaster, is 6 years dead. His mother and 3 younger brothers are still on the island, where bread costs a quarter of what it costs in the capital, and where, for now, the war is only a voice on the radio. Manolis sends them a postcard. He says he is well. He says the university is closed and he is reading at home. He does not mention the flag. A week later, the flag is still there. Then 2 weeks. Then 3. Every morning, on his way to the bakery on Adrianu Street, Manolis can see it from a particular angle in the plaka. By the 3rd week, he is taking detours through other streets so he does not have to look at it. By the 4th week, he is going out of his way to look. Something is hardening inside him in a way he cannot yet name. What is hardening in him is the same thing that is hardening in 300,000 other Athenians. The food. The food is going. The Germans have requisitioned everything. The fields around Athens have been stripped. The fishing boats are locked at Piraeus because petrol is rationed, and because the German Navy does not want unauthorized hulls in the Saronic Gulf. By mid-May, a small loaf of black bread on the open market costs 1/3 of a teacher's monthly salary. By the end of May, it costs 1/2. The famine that will kill an estimated 300,000 Greeks in the next 2 winters has not started yet. But anyone in Athens with eyes can see it coming. Manolis sees it coming. He sees it in the way the woman who runs the bakery on Adrianu stops looking at customers in the eye when she hands them their bread. He sees it in the cousin in the room next to his, an architecture student named Dimitris, who has started selling his drawing instruments one by one to a pawnbroker on Ermu Street. He sees it in his own ribs, which have begun to show through his shirt. The hardening inside him is not romantic. It is not noble. It is the simple animal calculation of a young man who has worked out that if the Germans stay, his mother and his brothers on Naxos will be dead by Easter. Something has to be said. Something has to be done that says, we are still here, and we have not agreed to this. The idea arrives on May 15th in a cafeteria on Solonos Street, 2 minutes from the university. Manolis is there with 3 other students, the cheapest table in the back, a single cup of thin coffee shared between 4. Apostolos Santas is one of the 4. Law student, 19 years old, or 20. The university registrar's surviving cards give 2 different dates for him, and he himself would later shrug about it. He is from a small island too, Patmos, the same kind of rocky childhood as Manolis. He is taller than Manolis, broader in the shoulders. He laughs easily. He does not look like a man about to commit treason. Apostolos is the one who says it. He says, looking out the window in the direction of the rock, somebody should pull that thing down. He says it the way young men say things in cafeterias, half joke, half bravado, a sentence meant to be forgotten by the time the coffee is finished. Manolis does not let it be forgotten. He waits until the other 2 boys have gone, until the waiter has wiped the table, until Apostolos is reaching for his jacket. Then he says quietly, in the same tone you would use to ask for directions, I know how. Apostolos stops with his jacket half on. He sits back down. For the next 40 minutes, Manolis explains. Not what he is going to do. Not yet. He explains the rock. He explains the way limestone weathers under 1,000 winters of Aegean wind. He explains that everybody who looks at the Acropolis sees the marble staircase, the propylaea, the polished steps that the Persians and the Romans and the Turks and now the Germans have all climbed in turn. Everybody assumes that is the only way up. Nobody since the Mycenaeans has thought about the cliff itself. Nobody except a boy who grew up on Naxos and who can read a wet limestone wall the way a doctor reads a chest X-ray. Apostolos listens. When Manolis finishes, Apostolos asks one question. He asks, When? Manolis says, "When I have walked around it 11 times in daylight, and I know exactly which fissure goes all the way up." From May 16th to May 28th, Manolis walks the perimeter of the sacred rock with a sketchbook under his arm. He carries the sketchbook deliberately. He has bought it from a shop on Dionysiou Areopagitou Street with the last of the money his mother sent him from Naxos, and he wears it the way a butcher wears an apron, as a uniform of harmlessness. He draws columns. He draws the eroded faces of caryatids. He draws nothing useful and a great deal that is useful. Every page that looks like a sketch of the Erechtheion has, in the bottom corner, a tiny pencil mark recording the meters of cliff visible from that angle, the position of the nearest sentry, the time the sentry passed, and the depth in centimeters of the nearest cleft in the rock. On the 7th walk, he finds the fissure. It runs almost 40 meters from a scree slope above the Theatre of Dionysus to within 12 meters of the eastern bastion. It is not vertical the whole way. There is a long diagonal section where the rock leans back at maybe 70 degrees, a passage a goat could walk if a goat could keep its nerve. Above that, a tight chimney, the kind a small body squeezes up by bracing back and knees. Above the chimney, a hole in the rock where the ancients cut a stairway up to a cistern. The Greeks call this system the clepsydra, after the spring that fed it in classical times. The Germans on their maps label the same area only as cliff. Manolis stands in the noon sun for 20 minutes, looking up at it, sketching the caryatids he cannot really see from this angle, and feels something that he later describes, in old age, as not courage, but simply the disappearance of doubt. On the 9th walk, he finds the cistern mouth. He goes inside with a candle on the 11th. He counts the bootsteps above his head. 2 pairs of sentries. Each pair takes 3 minutes and 40 seconds to cross from the south bastion to the eastern bastion and back. Between pairs, there is a gap of 9 minutes when no one is on the eastern side at all. The non-commissioned officer in the hut by the Erechtheion can see the flag, but not the platform underneath it. Manolis climbs back down, walks home through the plaka, and lies on his bed for an hour with his hands behind his head, working through the geometry. Then he gets up, goes to find Apostolos at the law faculty, and says, 3 nights from now. They spend those 3 days preparing. Almost nothing. A small lantern wrapped in cloth so the glass cannot rattle. A folded city map with the climb route marked in a code that looks like architectural notes. A length of butcher's twine for tying off the flag. 2 pocket knives. That is everything they take. No food, no water, no weapons. Apostolos asks once, half hoping, about a pistol. Manolis says, "If we are caught with a pistol, they shoot us as partisans. If we are caught without one, they only shoot us as students. The difference matters because in the second case, the Germans will be embarrassed, and embarrassed Germans tell their superiors less than triumphant ones do." He says this calmly, in his rented room, on the afternoon of May 28th. Apostolos looks at him for a long moment and then nods. The hardest part is not telling anyone. Manolis does not tell his cousins. He does not write a letter to his mother on Naxos. He thinks about it, sits at his desk with the pen in his hand, and decides against it. If they die on the rock, the letter would only deepen her grief by months. If they survive, the letter would be evidence in a German prosecutor's hand. He puts the pen down. He takes his father's photograph out of the desk drawer, where it has lived since the funeral, and slides it into his jacket pocket. His father is the only person he tells, in a sense, by carrying him along. Before we follow them up the cliff, a quick word. The channel runs on small acts of resistance like this one. If you have read this far, subscribe. It helps stories that history has tried to keep quiet find their audience. Now, back to the rock. On the evening of May 29th, 12 hours before the climb, Manolis goes alone to the theatre of Dionysus. He sits on a marble seat in the lowest tier. The theatre is empty. A single German soldier strolls along the upper rim, smoking, bored. Manolis tilts his head back and looks up at the rock above him. He stays there until the sun sets behind the Pnyx. He is not praying. He is doing what climbers do before a route they may not come back from. He is studying the line. He is committing it to a part of the body that is below thought. By the time he walks back down the lanes of the Plaka in the dusk, the route is in his hands and his feet and the small of his back. He has stopped being a student. He has become, for the next 12 hours, the thing the mountain men on Naxos used to call a rope eater. A man for whom the climb has already happened. Whether the climb itself works is another question. Whether the two of them survive contact with the wire, the sentries, the dogs that the garrison turns loose between 3 and 4 every morning, none of that has been answered yet. And once they have the flag in their hands, there is one more decision that neither of them has discussed out loud, because both of them know it has to be made on the rock, not in a cafeteria. How does an unarmed climber get past 2 pairs of Wehrmacht sentries on a moonless night without making a sound? And when the flag is in his hands and freedom is a quick descent away, why does he do something that almost guarantees the Germans will hunt him for the rest of the war? Apostolos goes first. He has to. Manolis carries the route in his head, and if one of them falls, it must be the one who can be replaced, which is the law student, not the cartographer of the cliff. Apostolos puts his hand on the horizontal crack 3 feet off the ground and starts up. He climbs the first 6 meters in just under 2 minutes. Manolis follows. They move in alternation, the way climbers on a real rope move, except they have no rope. When one of them is moving, the other freezes flat against the rock and holds a hold for the man above. If one of them comes off, the other will not catch him. Both of them know this. At the 8-meter mark, Apostolos's foot slips. A pebble the size of an almond drops. They both stop breathing. They count. They count to 40. Above them, on the bastion, nothing. No shouted German, no safety catch coming off. The pebble has fallen onto a tuft of weed instead of bare rock. They start moving again. The first 10 meters are the diagonal. The rock leans back at the angle Manolis remembered, and even by lantern light, even in the dark of a moonless May night, the holds are where his hands expect them to be. He realizes, somewhere on this section, that the route is climbing him, not the other way around. His body knows the moves. His mind is empty. He has done this same wall, in his head, perhaps 800 times over the last 2 weeks. The real climb is, in some uncanny way, almost a recital. At 15 meters, they reach the chimney. It is narrower than Manolis remembered. He has to take his jacket off and tie it around his waist by the sleeves. The father's photograph and the city map, both held against his ribs by the wadded cloth. He braces his back against one wall and his knees against the other and worms upward. Apostolos follows. The chimney is so tight that for a stretch of perhaps 2 meters, Manolis can feel the stone pressing on his chest each time he exhales. He climbs on the inhale. He stops on the exhale. By the time he comes out the top of the chimney, into the wider mouth that opens onto the cistern shaft, his shirt is soaked through and the muscles in his thighs are shaking with a fine, fast tremor he has not felt since he was 12 years old. Then they are in the cistern, the clepsydra, a bell-shaped chamber the Mycenaeans cut into the rock 3,000 years ago. The air is cold. It smells of wet stone and old lime. Manolis pauses with his hand flat against the wall and counts the boot steps above his head. 1 pair. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Gone. Now they have 9 minutes. The ancient staircase up to the plateau is broken. Only the bottom 4 steps survive, then a rubble cone, then a vertical 6-meter shaft to the small hole the German engineers do not have on their plans. Manolis goes up first this time because the shaft requires the climber to know where to put his right foot at the 4-meter mark on a hold the size of a coin. He finds it. He pulls. He puts his face up to the hole, slowly, the way you would put your face up to a window where there might be a dog. There is no dog. There is no sentry. There is only the flat platform of the eastern bastion, the cool air of the Attic plain coming up across it, and 20 meters away to his right, against the sky, the flagpole. The pole stands on a small concrete block the Germans poured 5 weeks ago. It is roughly 6 meters tall. The flag itself hangs in the windless dark, a slab of cloth that looks black until you remember that the field is supposed to be red. The white circle in the center, the swastika inside it, are catching the diffuse light of the sleeping city. From down in the placa on a normal night, this flag is the first thing you see when you look east at sunrise. Manolis pulls himself out onto the platform. He lies on his stomach for 30 seconds, breathing, watching. Apostolos comes up behind him. They crawl. Not crouch, crawl, the full length of their bodies pressed to the marble, elbows and knees taking the weight. 20 meters across an open platform takes them nearly 4 minutes. Halfway across, the next pair of sentries comes round on the south bastion. Both boys flatten. The sentries' boots pass within 15 meters of them. The lantern, wrapped in cloth, is pressed under Manolis's chest. The cloth absorbs the small clink the metal handle makes against the stone. The sentries pass. Their voices fade. They were speaking about something. A card game, Manolis thinks later. A name like Hans repeated twice. They were bored. They were not looking down. They were looking east toward the Hymettus ridge, where the sky would lighten in 3 hours. At the base of the pole, Apostolos goes up. He climbs the pole like a sailor climbs a mast. Hand over hand, knees clamped, no sound. Manolis stays at the bottom. He has the butcher's twine in his teeth. When Apostolos reaches the cleat at the top, he does not cut the flag loose. They have already discussed this. A flag cut from a pole flutters down, and the cloth is loud, and the rope end snaps against the mast. Instead, Apostolos unties the halyard, the way the Germans would have untied it themselves at the next dawn, and lowers the flag down to Manolis hand over hand. The huge cloth comes down in slow folds. Manolis catches it across his arms. It is heavier than he expected. The wool is dense, and the swastika patch is a stiff applique sewn on with industrial thread. The whole thing must weigh 6 or 7 kilograms. He sinks under the weight for a second, then steadies. Apostolos slides down. Together they bundle the flag into a tight roll and tie it with the twine. From a distance, if someone passed now, it could be a rolled-up tarpaulin or a tent. They begin the crawl back to the cistern hole. This is the moment everything could end clean. Get the bundle through the hole, down the shaft, down the chimney, down the diagonal, out under the wire near the Theatre of Dionysus before the 4 o'clock dog patrol. By dawn, both of them in their own beds, the flag rolled under Manolis's mattress, and the next day, the photograph in the Eleftheron Vima would have to be of an empty pole. That is when Apostolos says, in a whisper so low Manolis almost misses it, "We take it home, yes?" Manolis stops crawling. He turns his head. They are halfway across the platform with the rolled flag between them. He thinks about the photograph in his pocket. He thinks about his father, who used to say, the flag is only a piece of cloth, that what matters is what people are willing to do under it. He thinks about the 300,000 Athenians who are starting to die slowly in their kitchens. He thinks about what a rolled-up swastika in a student's room means to a Gestapo officer, and what it means to the cousins who share the room, and what it means to a landlady, and what it means to the building. He says, also whispering, "No, we leave it in the cave." Apostolos does not argue. He nods. They keep crawling. In the cistern, by the cold, lime-smelling wall of the clepsydra, Manolis unrolls the flag halfway. He cuts a single rectangle out of the corner of the cloth with his pocket knife, about the size of 2 hands, and folds it into his shirt against his skin. Proof, for someone, someday, that the cloth that hung over Athens really did come down on this night. The rest of the flag, he and Apostolos lay flat on the cistern floor, spread out, swastika upward, where the first archaeologist with a torch will find it within 48 hours, and where, in the meantime, no German will look, because no German on the plateau above knows the cave is there. They cover it with a thin scatter of broken roof tile and limestone dust to keep curious shadows off it. Then they go back down the shaft, back through the chimney, back down the diagonal, out under the wire by the Theatre of Dionysus at 3:47 in the morning. The flag is not in their hands, the flag is in the rock. This is the moral turn, and the boys will not even understand it fully until years later. By taking the cloth home as a trophy, they would have made the act a private one, a souvenir, a brag, a relic in a shoebox. By leaving it in the cave under the bastion, they made it something else entirely. They made it a fact the Germans would have to explain. They made it a story Athens would have to tell out loud. They made it impossible for the occupier to pretend the flag had simply been changed out at routine maintenance. Above all, they made it possible for any Athenian who heard the rumor to walk up to the Theatre of Dionysus that day and see, with his own eyes, the empty pole on the bastion. That emptiness was the message. The cloth itself, hidden in the cistern, was only the receipt. By 6 in the morning, when the first pair of sentries comes back from the western circuit, the eastern bastion still has its flagpole. The pole still has its halyard. The halyard has nothing on it. The sentries stand staring up at the bare cleat for almost a minute. One of them runs to the wooden hut by the Erechtheion to find the non-commissioned officer. The non-commissioned officer comes out without his cap. He looks up at the empty pole for a longer time than the sentries did. Then he says one word, in German, that the survivors will later remember as Scheisse, and he runs for the telephone. The Wehrmacht garrison commander in Athens receives the news at 6:22 in the morning. By 7, the German press attaché has issued an instruction to every Greek newspaper in Athens that the incident is not to be mentioned. By 8, every newspaper editor in Athens has already heard the story from a relative of a baker who saw the empty pole on the way to work. By noon, half the city knows. By evening, all of it does. The Germans replaced the flag 2 days later. 2 days. For 48 hours, the highest point of the Acropolis stands empty in the May sun, because the garrison cannot decide whether to put up a new flag immediately, which would advertise that the old one had been taken, or to leave the pole bare while they investigate. They choose to leave it bare. The choice is itself a confession. Anyone in Athens with eyes can read it. Manolis sleeps for 14 hours. When he wakes up in his rented room near the university, the small rectangle of cloth he cut from the corner of the flag is still inside his shirt, against his ribs. He takes it out, looks at it for a long moment. Coarse red wool, a single stitch of black thread from the edge of the swastika applique, and burns it in the metal basin he uses for washing. The ash he tips out the window into the back garden where his landlady grows basil. The basil, he later said in a memoir, never noticed. The Germans hunt for the climbers for the rest of the war. They never identify them. They condemn the two unknown saboteurs to death in absentia, a sentence with no name on it, a strange legal document that the Wehrmacht prosecutor's office in Athens files away in 1941, and that will be found by a Greek historian in the German Federal Military Archives decades after the war. Several Greeks are executed in the months that follow in connection with sabotage incidents the Garrison cannot otherwise solve. Manolis Glezos carries those two deaths for the rest of his life. He is finally arrested by the Italians in March 1942 for an entirely different piece of resistance work. He is tortured. He is released. He is arrested again by the Germans in April 1943. He is tortured again, more methodically this time, in the basement at 4 Merlin Street. He survives. He is arrested by the Bulgarians, who are also occupying parts of Greece. He survives that too. By the end of 1944, when the Germans pull out of Athens, Manolis Glezos has been arrested 3 times by 3 different fascist powers and is alive only because each one of them assumed somebody else had already shot him. The flag he and Apostolos lifted is recovered from the Clepsydra Cistern by Greek archaeologists in 1945. It is now in the Greek War Museum in Athens. Visitors can stand within a meter of it. The swastika is faded, but the cloth is intact. Apostolos Santos survives the war. He is sentenced to death twice, once by the Germans for the flag, once by the Greek colonels for being a communist, and serves 7 years in island prison camps under the regime that ruled Greece in the 1960s. He dies in 2011 at the age of 91. Manolis Glezos serves a total of more than 11 years in prisons under 5 different governments: German, Italian, Bulgarian, Greek royalist, Greek colonel, for the same fundamental crime of refusing to agree. He serves twice in the European Parliament, the second time well into his 90s. He is tear-gassed by Greek riot police in Syntagma Square at the age of 88 during the austerity protests of 2010, and the photograph of that moment runs in newspapers from Buenos Aires to Tokyo. He dies on March 30th, 2020, at the age of 97. The Acropolis flag is lowered to half-mast that afternoon. The Greek flag this time. He had outlived the swastika by 79 years. In the post-war decades, French presidents and resistance veterans across the continent come to describe him as the first partisan of Europe, a phrase that follows him for the rest of his life. He never owned the flag. He owned the cut corner for a few hours, and then he burned it into a flower pot. What he kept instead was the harder thing. The memory of 2 pairs of bootsteps passing 15 meters from his face on the eastern bastion. The smell of wet lime in a Mycenaean cistern. The weight of 6 kilograms of cloth coming down into his arms in the dark. And the moment, halfway across the platform, when a friend asked a sensible question, and he answered with the harder one. The Germans flew their flag over the Acropolis for roughly 3.5 years, from April 27, 1941, to October 12, 1944. For 2 of those days, the pole was bare. Those 48 hours in May 1941 were the gift of a village boy who could read a wet limestone wall and a law student who once said somebody should pull that thing down. The gift was never returned. It was simply taken back, in pieces, by a continent that needed a long time to understand that the war had already started to be lost on a Greek cliff at 2 in the morning. If this one stayed with you, there are more on the channel. Subscribe if you'd like the next story brought to you when it lands.